Okay, action.
Wall Street was my ability to get back to a domestic agenda. I just won the Oscar for Platoon, and I was a big believer in cursing yourself by not working. A lot of directors get the Oscar, they don't go back to work for a while because they know it's going to be just impossible to have the same set of circumstances again. You know, it's just a lucky break. But I wanted to get over it. You know, I didn't want to get hung up in that thing that happens, inertia. So I just plunged right in. Next month, I was planning the film. I wanted to go back to my roots in New York after Vietnam and see what it was like and explore the new Wall Street, which I noticed during I was writing Scarface in the early 80s in Miami. There was so much coke around and so many lunatics. And guys from New York, these kids, like for the first time I'd ever seen, millionaires to me were in their 60s, you know, older men were rich. Here were these kids running around at 25, 28, 35, with millions of dollars, with these, you know, playing the market all over the world around the clock. It was just like a new world. My father would have been shocked at the electronics that allowed that to happen. Here was one of my first films about America. And I have to find out about America, so I had to dig in by going there first, because that was my roots. You know, in a way, if you really think about it, that was my home, because Dad was on Wall Street. And I remember those offices and those buildings. And I remember my dad's integrity. He really stood for another world that you don't see today. But it seemed to me that there was more dignity and more class, more integrity. The concept of principles applied, although there were crooks all the time. I'm not saying that all the crooks happened in the 80s. They certainly were crooks. But there was a sort of a standard of values. Business films hadn't been done since Executive Suite, Robert Wise. My father had often criticized the movies as not having done realistic businessmen. So as best I could, I did an homage to Dad and his world, as well as the new world that was coming up. The stock market now is everywhere. Some kid wearing grunge clothes, being a stockbroker in Long Island, it doesn't matter, you know. Everything's broken down.
Oliver's timing on Wall Street was impeccable in terms of when the picture was made. 89, 90 was the end of that whole kind of movement. Bottom fell out for a while there.
Of white-collar crime that was emerging in greater numbers in the mid-'80s. I did not foresee the crash, as some people say, because if I had, I would have made a lot of money. But no, that was insane. Somebody said that I made the film to exploit the crash, and that person doesn't seem to realize it takes a year and a half to make the film, so how would I know there was going to be a crash in October 87 and our film is coming out in December 87? They let us shoot on the New York Stock Exchange during working hours. I asked them to stage a very hectic scene because it was a volatile stock. And those guys were really hams, but you know, those salesmen, it was great. And we got to see the SEC. We went around New York. Ken Lipper, the ex-deputy mayor, helped us enormously, as did many advisors. I always thought of Wall Street as like an extension of my Scarface script. Stanley Weiser and I were writing about some very colorful characters, of which Gordon Gekko was the chief criminal. And he was fun, you know. It was written in a spirit of fun and craziness. Because I do think that when you look back, you know, like I try to do reality, but I want to heighten it up for people like Hitchcock did and make it exciting. It's not like I really do believe you have to cut the boring bits out. Now, what's boring? You know, you can argue back and forth. You know, French filmmakers will say something, action is boring. Or Russian filmmakers will say life is boring. You know, everybody has different definitions of boring, but in this country, we do practice a form of gladiatorial cruelty, I think. You know, it's pretty quick.
Because the movie was relatively sophisticated in terms of the nuances of business, that you really needed an old-fashioned villain. You know, you needed a, you know, really twirling up the corners, a really clear, strong villain, take no prisoners, unmerciful kind of guy to create the kind of drama. You needed some archetypal characters. Otherwise, I think the sophistication of the piece and the subtleties would be boring. One of Oliver's great strengths is his ability at casting. He has a great eye. He has given actors, many actors, the best parts in their careers.
Michael was not known as a heavyweight A-list dramatic actor at that point. He was more of a TV actor, a good, charming leading man, but, you know, a producer too, of China Syndrome and all that, and Cuckoo's Nest. But I knew Michael from my personal meetings with him, really very impressed with his financial acumen. Very smart man.
My career up until then, I'd been doing sensitive young men roles and, you know, and even Fatal Attraction just before that was, you know, guys sort of manipulated by a woman. So to have that kind of opportunity, and it sort of set the tone for me, you know, good and bad in the future part of my career after Wall Street. That was an ultimate role in terms of being a bad guy and being nasty. And so I got it down pretty good.
This is Kirk Douglas's son. I mean, I can see there's anger in Michael. You don't see it. He's so smooth. And he also had that smirk, which is great. You can't buy that smirk. You know, an actor has to look the part. He looked like Pat Riley, and who looked like Gordon Gekko, which is what we wanted.
I was scared. It was definitely what you call an adult role. Tremendous amount of dialogue and speeches. Oliver and I talked a lot about the Long Island background on this guy who'd worked his way up, you know, hard and mercilessly right on up through the ranks and built on that. It was a toughness that did not exist in the sort of Ivy League group.
Steve, Charlie's gonna go to this trailer for a few minutes.
It's okay?
Yeah.
Okay. Right back.
And the film was unspecified. The title wasn't given. He said something as vague as we're going from this jungle to a concrete jungle. It's going to be based on a young trader who's seduced by the promise of quick gains. Not dissimilar from Platoon, the tug of war between good and evil. I thought, great. And I still didn't really have an idea that Oliver was a genius. You know, this, of course, was revealed later on, you know, because he is. If you look at his films, it's they change the way you feel about the subject, and in certain ways the way you feel about yourself in relation to these subjects, you know. And I think anytime a filmmaker can do that, can make it so personal, he's on a different level, and then that's where Oliver's at.
Charlie was the main guy, and Charlie anchors the movie in a very stolid performance. There is a sort of adolescent awe in his eyes, like in Platoon. There's sort of like this stiffness. I like stiff. I mean, sometimes stiff is good. Charlie fit my purposes because of his kind of stiffness, which you have when you're an adolescent or a younger man looking up to older men. It's kind of intimidating, you know. He's a nobody from Queens.
The guy's original name, by the way, was Joe Fox. But there was a Joe Fox on Wall Street, and he wouldn't give us permission. So I said, Oliver, I said, what about Bud? And Oliver said, Bud Fox. Sounds like Butt Fox. And I said, well, in your mind, perhaps, but I think it's kind of a good name. And so he went with it. And then it became Buddy Boy and all this, you know.
I empathize with Charlie because most movies that I always did, I was in every single scene. People forget Charlie was like in every single scene in this movie. You know, he really was I think the voice for Oliver for a long time. This kid who came in and tried to pitch me on a stock, and then in my mentoring process by the end sells his own father out. It was a device, you know, literary writing device, but it was quite successful in sharing a large philosophy.
It was interesting having my dad play my dad. But Oliver gave me two choices. He said, I was at his house one night, and he said, do you want Jack Lemmon or do you want your father? And I said, well, Jack Lemmon's a genius, no question, but my dad's my dad, and he's kind of a genius too.
I related very well with that character. And the moral sense of himself that he had was maybe not unlike myself. I've been accused of being moralistic on a lot of issues. So maybe Oliver saw that in me. I know Charlie did.
Marty Sheen and Hal Holbrook were sort of two sides of my dad. My dad was not a labor sympathizer at all. He would not have taken Martin Sheen's position in business. But that dialogue between father and son, that honesty, is sort of what I had with my father. And with Hal Holbrook, it was more about, that was my father's business side, the conservative advice. And he loved aphorisms. You know, I was criticized for having Holbrook talking aphorisms. I don't know, but that's the way my dad would often talk.
I didn't really understand a lot of the symbolism behind what he was delivering in those scenes, and you know, until later. Not because I was an idiot, just because it didn't, they kind of come out of nowhere. You know, but he's the voice of morality. He's kind of a soothsayer in a way, you know. I said to Oliver, I said, I don't get these scenes. He says, you're not supposed to. I'm just playing puzzle. Hal was terrific. You know, he was a consummate pro, and a really good guy.
34, take 6.
Okay, action.
I think Oliver felt he was now under the microscope, and his direction got a little more intense and a little more demanding, and he wasn't as easily satisfied, you know. I can imagine that the pressure must have been overwhelming. He, at times, looked like a nervous producer, always looking at his script, always looking at his watch. But he was always so concerned with time and with the budget and with the page count and with this and that. I was like, Oliver, just direct.
He shot that scene pretty much in sequence, and that was one of those days when Michael was really suffering because it was early on, and unfortunately we threw a lot of dialogue at him the first few days, which I don't think he ever had before from TV. So, you know, he was really marbling some words in that limousine. That was the tough one to cut together. He got better and smoother as it went along, but the scene is great because I like the fact that Douglas is so ruthless with his time. It's like the moment the kid doesn't get it, out the door, he stops the car, he doesn't drop, get out, over, goodbye kid. And the kid understands that that's the way the rules are played in this world. You know, it's do or die. There's no moment to reflect. You do. You don't think, you do. So he has to say, I'm in, although he doesn't want to be in. It takes him a long time to realize he's broken his own rules.
You know, it was beautiful writing. I worked hard on it. I actually worked also with a speech instructor just in terms of breath controls and vocally to kind of try to get the rhythm and keep going. I remember that scene well. It was one of the first. And again, Oliver has I guess depending on the picture, but has a certain guerrilla type of filmmaking, is an extraordinary cameraman named Bobby Richardson. And we shot a lot of that scene in a regular limousine with Bobby Richardson, you know, having a camera in the jump seat about where I am, you know, about this close. And they have flat lenses and the camera's right in your face and you have to have really good concentration. That scene came early in the whole experience and gave me an idea of what was to come.
He's got all the dialogue, and I think I've got like 3 lines in that scene. And those scenes sometimes are harder to play just listening and just playing stuff that, you know, the audience is absorbing through you. The original deal of, all right, Mr. Gecko, you got me, I think happened in the limo. We decided that there needed to be some physical transition, so it happens outside the limo. And I said, let me drop the briefcase as the limo pulls away. Not like a brilliant choice or anything, but just a little detail.
Charlie shows how much he wants to make money because by doing a couple of things beforehand and taking a couple of tips illegally and acting on them, I own him now. He's already done a couple of things in this movie, which shows me just how much he wants it. And yes, he would screw his father, as he did. Did I create that? I think I guided it. You know, I gave him a taste of what that was all about. And then his hunger became insatiable.
I was so nervous working with these people I'd grown up watching on television and the movies, and suddenly I'm the guy they're relying on to carry half the load, and I'm like, thinking, Jesus, how did I get talked into this? And he did the big office scene, the introduction scene where I come in and give him the cigars, you know. We shot it over 2 days, and there was 58 setups, and an average of 8 or 12 takes per setup. I mean, it was a beating. And we kept saying to Oliver, isn't this thing covered? You know, the only thing to cover it with at this point is a furniture pad, you know? But at the end of it, there was nothing fresh about it, you know? And Michael leaned in and he said, because they were on him, he says, are you buying this? Is this still good? And I was shocked, you know. He wants my opinion on his work. I said, yeah, it's perfect. Don't change a thing. What am I going to say? No, tweak this, Michael. You know. So it was nice when that was offered.
I mean, I remember the first day I went in to look at that set. I went, oh man, how am I going to get comfortable in this? I went to a few big Wall Street players at the time, and you know, it was not far off in terms of how they try to intimidate, in terms of these big financing guys, and try to give all the dross of royalty. You know, they really do try to create that effect.
I wanted to capture the energy of these guys. I wanted to get some sense of what drove them, of why they worshipped this world and became slaves to it, to sell their mother, to sell a stock. And they hooked me up with some very interesting people that took me into and through that world. I purchased some stocks and was able to chart them on a daily basis during the rehearsals and throughout the picture. There were certain guys that I sort of understood what they were doing, but I could never picture it as my own lifestyle. It's not that it was so foreign, it's just that the ideals, the motivation. There was an absolute and complete, total absence of compassion and creativity. It was all about money. It was all about greed being good.
Most directors take on a kind of a patriarch point of view, sort of a fatherly, putting your arms around your shoulders. And Oliver is a director that challenges you. I think some of this comes from his whole Vietnam background about you are either in the trench or you're not. And if you're in the trench, he has to know that his back is protected, just like you have to know. So he will test you. And I think that, you know, Oliver, in hindsight, he found out now, wanted to kind of, you know, just kind of amp me up a little bit more in terms of my repressed anger at this, and is not afraid for you to have your anger directed at him if it makes the scene better. Nor does he give you a safety net. Early on, he did come into my trailer and asked me, you okay? And I said, yeah. He said, you doing drugs? I said, what? No, I'm not doing drugs. He said, because, you know, you look like you haven't acted before. And of course, I was playing Gordon Gecko, and the air came out, and now I'm like, what are you doing? And what he did is he forced me to go back and to work on this part, and to do homework, and read my lines upwards and downwards, and standing on my head and brushing my teeth. and to push myself harder as an actor than I have before. It culminated with the Greed is Good speech before the board, which I had in really good shape, and we shot from every single angle in the world. And when we came up to my close-up, I watched him. He was right next to the camera, as he was all the time, except he wasn't looking at me. He was looking at the script and making sure that I was word perfect. But did it make me crazy at the time? Yes. Did it help me with my performance in terms of anger, repression? Absolutely. Could I act to him right off camera and point my... Absolutely. And I hug him today, and am grateful for pushing me and for giving me this opportunity.
He takes us on this journey, and he convinces us that greed is good. And I'm in the movie, and I know that greed is not good, but I'm sitting there buying it at the time. And he stops on about take 5, in the middle of it, and over the PA, he says to Oliver, Oliver, I'm over here. And suddenly Oliver realized that the scene was not continuing, and he looked up from his script and saw that Michael was calling him out, that he was upset that he wasn't watching his performance.
In those days, we used to be closer to the actor sometimes, when the monitor system wasn't as sophisticated. I would prefer to be away from the actor in the tent, because I could be very strong with my thought waves, and I don't want to throw him by looking at him, because then he'll feel he's being judged if he looks over at me, you see. Because your eyes should encompass the room, and you should be free. That's why the eye line is important to an actor. So I don't want to break his concentration. I mean, as you're sweeping by, you see a director judging you. Sometimes I could throw you, especially somebody like Michael. So that's why I pretend to look down, but I'm really looking up when they're not looking. You know, it's very rarely do our lives, because I'm looking like this, you see. I'm really concentrating on his performance. But I don't want him to know that I am. You can tell through script and the way you're hearing it, if it's the right tonality. And sometimes it's really important. Directors forget this. If you believe in the script, and that's the reason you're doing the movie. Some directors don't. They say, I'm going to do it. But if you really believe in the script, that's your Bible. You've got to remember what you intended before you even shot the scene. Because once you go into the scene, it's going to be action. And there's no time to think, there's not that meditation or ability to correct time is very expensive, you say. So you're really into huge mistakes. And it's very important to understand what you intended, not to forget that. Because you get lost sometimes out there.
There were a couple of times that he asked me to be specific, where I was off on a tangent, and in acting, you know, I thought I knew the part, and who the hell are you to tell me I'm the boy's father in real life? And he was right. An author is always entitled to his language or her language, and for the director as well as the writer, it's real special. So he was disciplined with me about that. He got real close with me and said, hey man, those are not my words. Those are your words, and those are fine, but for this film, for this scene, at this time, I'd like these words. And I'm glad he did.
Thing about Wall Street, I had some friends who made a lot of money, but how do you get off the merry-go-round? Or do they want to? And they don't. And one of the many scenes I liked out in the country actually was the one on the beach, the wake-up call. And I thought that whole speech of how money goes around the world's working at night, goes around this full circle, but that's the kind of commitment. If you were in the military, I guess you'd be wearing ribbons and this and that. And Wall Street, you know, you have paintings. Or other assets. Beautiful woman, might be a mistress, beautiful houses. Really interesting casting with Daryl. You understood it quite well in terms of somebody having this power, and there are contracts and negotiations that are made all the time with beautiful young women.
With Daryl, I tried to explain the character over and over to her, and I don't know that she misunderstood me. I hope not, but perhaps I didn't handle her well enough. I'm not sure. I may have not been sensitive to her own problems, but she certainly was never happy with the role, and I don't know, in a sense, why she took it.
My heart went out to her because I could see she was, I shouldn't say struggling, but she was uncomfortable during a lot of it. You know, she gives a really good performance.
She's a very simple, beautiful, natural woman, and I think the complexity of the role of a greedy, grasping person conflicted with her idealism. That materialism was in conflict with her at a deeper level than she was aware of, and it really bothered her. I should have picked up on it too and just said, you know, look, trade places with Sean. Because Sean would have stepped right in there and been a pisser. He said, I think Charlie and her would have strangled each other before the end of the movie. Imagine her as Charlie's girlfriend.
We were shooting a sequence at my Hampton summer house with her there, and they just did not get it on or could not figure it out what to be. And each had their own unique style and way of working and their own strong opinions. And I was both funny and awkward.
I think at the time I said, I'm not sure that Terrence Stamp would come to his house, but unless they really knew each other or been in some deal together. But a lot of these people do meet up at the Hamptons. You know, there are places where they meet. At skiing resorts, you know, they know each other. But we heated up the scene between Douglas and Stamp with the words, you know, being more lawyers' words or more about threats. But, you know, really it's important we try to make it clear to the audience more or less what the stakes were here and how stocks are manipulated for big, big money.
I was a big fan of Terrence's, and I remember doing that scene with him because of his whole English background. There's a feeling of almost doing a restoration play. There's almost a foppishness of these two peacocks, both of us sort of kind of fancy dressers, very superficial, very kind of self-conscious in terms of effect. That particular scene had a feeling of like, you know, who's got a bigger dick than the other one, and that kind of feeling.
I called it the demolished look. I wanted to have this apartment look like a place where your baby would be impaled. You know, no mother would allow a child under 6 years old in that apartment. And Darryl was all this fashion conscious. I was making fun of the New York high life, upper class life. And I loved it. Michael puts the cuffing down on the table and it goes right through because half the table is a real table, the other half is a fake table. And it was a hilarious moment in the movie.
I don't think Gordon was a kind of character who opened himself up to a lot of people. A mentor, you never know where a mentor is going to come from. You know, and I always try to tell young people, you know, just be open for mentors because they're so important. Somebody's going to teach you. Well, this was not necessarily a good mentor.
Confront the mentor. Confront the evil. Call it what it is. Identify it so that those that you're protecting or leading or loving know where you stand with the dark side. Call it what it is. Stand there. Challenge it. You might get your ass kicked, but all good things in life cost you something.
In all the rehearsals, all he said is measure a man's success by the size of his wallet. You know, he just kept saying wallet. And then we rolled camera and suddenly, you know, by the size of his wallet. And it was like, I came out of my shoes, you know.
I was doing a tribute to George C. Scott, whom I loved, you know, from his famous line in The Hustler, you know, you owe me money. And I was just trying to tell George, hey, that still is impressive with me.
So I made a decision in that moment to try to come right back at him when I should have backed off and given a little more balance to it, you know. And I learned a valuable lesson that day about trying to match a guy that's been there a lot longer than you. There's a lot more experience.
No, I disagree. The scene is memorable because of what he did. He wasn't going to let me bully him. Because that's, I think, what it would have been interpreted as. He hit me as hard as I hit him. I didn't expect anything less. Both of us had a little problem with that because Oliver loves to move his camera rather than just do still coverage, talking heads. You know, he moves off one to the other. So we had to wait till the camera came on us. You see that scene again, watch how long it takes. And we were beat, get up there, you know, boom, now talk, beat, get back down, now get over, you know, you talk, now beat, you know, go back and forth. Remember, there was no coverage in that scene. So both Charlie and I were you know, straining because the emotional life and the dialogue wanted to tumble on one another, and yet visually we weren't on camera until we waited, you know. So that's the discipline of that scene. That's a pretty good little scene.
The scene on the sidewalk, I delivered this diatribe. He said to me, he says, it is. He says, these are things you've heard me say 1,000 times growing up. So you're not coming up with these. They don't have to be fresh thoughts. They're just suddenly all put together and thrown back at me. And I thought, okay, that makes sense.
And I remember there, Oliver had some very specific line. You lay down with the prostitutes, whatever it was. And I had thrown that away. I didn't like that line. I was trying something else. Oh, he came at me again. Oh, he said, excuse me. Did you study these lines? I said, yeah, I did, but I didn't care for it. Well, I do. You know, he was very specific, very disciplined about that. And I'm grateful to him for calling me on it, because it was his line.
How companies are bought and sold. That's what the movie on the surface is about, is the new economy of the 80s, you know, in the sense that companies that have no knowledge of that business are buying businesses just to buy them in order to expand and become conglomerates that sell more stock to the public to become even bigger. So it's like a pyramid scheme for companies, but they don't know anything about what they're doing. I got a ball pen factory, I got a movie factory, I got a water making factory. I don't know anything about these things. I'm just a conglomeration of these companies. But hey, the stock people are believe in me. They're tipping it. People are buying it. I'm getting bigger. I'm going to buy a few more companies. And then you pyramid it. You go up. And then maybe you sell out before it's too late, or you let it explode. You get caught in the explosion. But that's happened. And many people have lost their jobs. And many people have lost their security, their sense of commitment. It's a pyramid scheme. It should never have been allowed. There should have been much more. I think the SEC let it go. They really should have paid attention. What does a company that has nothing to do with another company have a right to buy that company? Just because of money? I don't think so. The company should not be sold because it's the stockholders are selling it and they're not really working at the company, you see? So the market is determining the conditions, and I think that's very cruel. Because if you're a company that works, a family company, a big company, you've been working, then I think why terminate it?
The breakup scene with Daryl and I, Oliver was collecting art at the time, and he was collecting Keith Haring. And there was a particular mask that he bought, and he paid some ridiculous amount of money for it. And it's on the wall in the background. And he says, I got to throw the tequila bottle. And he says, whatever you do, do not hit the herring, So I made it a point in like 5 or 6 takes to nail it, because I was a baseball player. I had a great arm, and I just put it dead center. Because the night before we did that, he said, whatever you do tonight, don't go back to the hotel. He said, I want you to close the bars. I want you to stay up all night, drink this, that, whatever it takes. He said, I want you to show up wrecked tomorrow. I was like, not a problem. So I guess I was in that mode. When you tell a guy, don't destroy the herring, it becomes the primary target.
I wanted something to help sober him, even though I perhaps went too far. But I did have a similar experience with my own father. So I said, I pretty much let it go. I knew it was emotional, and, opened it up and just let them interact with each other. It was very simply shot. When you're looking at your father close to death, you're really dealing with essential, blood and life issues, and your own death, too.
There wasn't anything enacted in that scene between him and I, that's for sure. We both knew what that scene was. We'd done it already. I'd been ill over in the Philippines while we were filming Apocalypse, and Charlie, of all the children, I think was hit the hardest by it. He was very sensitive to my condition and really scared that I might die. He felt kind of lost, very vulnerable. So that's what that scene is all about, I think. We kind of really did that scene in the real life. And so it wasn't hard to create on film. It was very sweet. He wept uncontrollably. I did too. It was a deeply, deeply moving experience.
I'd lived that as a kid, during Apocalypse. He had a heart attack. I, went to visit him in the Philippines and sat in his hospital room, post-heart attack. So there was not a lot of preparation needed for that.
But I adore him. He's one of my favorite actors in the world. He's a magnificent actor. I love working with him. When you work with your closest friends and they happen to be your children, it doesn't get much better than that.
Oliver introduced me to a guy that really went through that. I can't remember his name, but he said this guy walked into his office and they were waiting for him. And I asked him, I said, well, what was your reaction? What did you do? He said, I knew right then it was over, and there was a sense of relief, and he broke down and cried. He just wept. He was at the end of the line, So I'm thinking, great, this is what he wants, So I said, okay, I can do this. And we did it a couple times, and it was forced. It wasn't right. It felt stupid and phony. And so my dad had written me this letter, and I think it was right before he left the city. And he's like a 2-page letter about the things I needed to change in my life, and that my priorities were askew, and I spend my money like a drunken sailor was a quote that I remember, and on and on and on. And it was it brought up a certain emotion, So I kept the letter on me. Oliver built a cage that I had to wear that he put a camera on. This thing weighed about 60 pounds. So wherever I walked, I had complete freedom because the set was cleared. And anything I did, the camera stayed with me. It was pretty innovative. So I'm sitting in this cage. Everybody's like staring at me, waiting for me to give them the thumbs up, and I'm just reading this letter in a camera cage on Wall Street. It was like a very surreal moment. But the letter found something in me that triggered enough remorse or shame or whatever, and it got me to that place,
There were 2 fathers. One would be the Martin Sheen character, the other one would be Michael Douglas, and he had a battle between the two. And it's odd that when he emerges from the jungle in Platoon, he's killed the gecko figure, which he also does in the other movie in the Central Park in that scene. He kills him with the tape, which is very real because there was a lot of taping going on at that time.
I took him under my wing. I showed him everything to do to succeed under my rules, and he betrayed me. I felt in that period of time like a son who had betrayed me.
I loved setting it in that park, and when we arrived there, he said, well, it's raining, we can't do it. I said, no, let's go, and we got that great light.
Douglas sucker punches me the first one, then he gives me a couple more once he's roughing me. There was one take where he clipped me. He got me, and I think they used it, and in the middle of his tirade, and I gave you this, and I gave you that, he says, you all right? I said, yeah, and he says, and I gave you that. He took a moment to be a human being and check that his fellow actor wasn't missing a molar, you know, and then continued into his thing, which I thought was really cool.
Yeah, I gave him the slap. I caught him one time. Those things happen. It was one of those on paper when you read it, you didn't think it could possibly really be pulled off because, again, it was fairly wordy and it covered a lot of information. But it was it had that kind of a Western feeling.
He turns in the bad father, in a sense. He understands what the worth of his real father was, the good father, who tells him in a very honest way, you gotta go, man. The father is brokenhearted, but he says it's the only way you can really redeem yourself. It's your life now. You can only redeem yourself by going to jail for whatever time it takes. And it will be painful. And I'm brokenhearted as your dad, but you gotta do it. It's the beginning of your life now. You've earned finally character. Character is that ability, as Holbrook said, you know, to stare into the abyss and not go in.
That last scene is all of us. I remember he was very specific about the dialogue in that scene. I thought it was a throwaway and I could say, you know, anything I pleased, as long as it was the gist of the idea. No, sir. He was very specific about those words. And I admired him for it, and he was right. When I saw the film, I realized how right he was.
But it is very fatherly. It's very forgiving. It's not accusatory. It's not any of that. It's father and son, you know. You messed up. You got caught. Go settle it.
In the end, is unfortunately a lot of people saw Charlie Sheen's character as a sucker or a schmuck, where I sort of got away with it. I think on one hand, it was really interesting that Oliver took that approach, but even with it being wiretapped and all this, as I remember, it wasn't really clear if anything was seriously going to happen to Gordon Gekko. He was going to go on. Meanwhile, Charlie takes a hit and is going to have to go do some jail time. And the irony was that nobody saw a moral dilemma. And I think what shook me the most, and I know Oliver, as we said, was this adoration with Gordon Gekko. And because it's been so easy the last 10 or 20 years to make money, there is no sense of ethics.
It's expensive, man. It's going to cost you something. If you want to live an honest life, it's going to cost you something. And the more honest you are, the more expensive it becomes. I think that's what, in large measure, Wall Street is really about. How much is it going to cost?
Wall Street, you know, as a business film, continues to play on television around the world almost weekly. Wherever you go, you see a version of it playing. It's one of the most successful films through time.
I get guys coming up to me on the street, you know, stockbrokers that became a broker because of this movie, because of my character. I get people calling me wanting to open an account just so they can say that they have an account with the original Bud Fox, you know.
To this day, the number of people who come up to me said, hey, man, you're the reason that I got into Wall Street. Yeah, Gordon Gekko, right, greed is good. And I say, I was the villain in this movie. But they loved that quality of take no prisoners. And if I had one more person, which is so depressing and sad, they come up to me to say, you know, you're the reason why I got into Wall Street. And I went, it's a sad commentary.
People love the devil. They love the devil. They admire the nuts, the extremists, if they're well done, if they're charming. People all have the desire in them to break the taboos, the codes of their societal restrictions. You know, you're working in a normal job, you're doing your good thing, you're normal, and you get an outlet, you know. Here's this lunatic, this guy who's living his life in a heightened realism, you know, and he's getting away with it. He's a pirate, he's a buccaneer, you know. Oh, he's gonna get his in the end, you know it. But you're kind of rooting for him because it's the American tradition of the swashbuckler, the outlaw, Jesse James. I think we all secretly want that. Not all, but, you know, not the blue noses.
What's wrong with greed, man? Look what it got us. Yeah, we don't see the dark side. We don't see what those tall buildings cast a shadow on a lot of people that are freezing. And there's all this talk now about the information highway. Well, we're all, you know, moving along this information highway. We're moving so quickly, we don't see all the casualties along the way. We don't see any hitchhikers. We don't see people sleeping and living along the side of the road in their vehicles. We don't see people going off. We don't see any of that. That's what all of us have to come to grips with, is how much does my own personal desire and my greed worth? Is it worth the lives of other people, including my own life? How much is it worth?
Oliver is definitely our blind justice. He's not afraid to put a mirror up to society and take the hits.
And action. Back up.